golden light reflected off expensive champagne glasses as the private jet soared across the Atlantic Ocean. The powerful billionaire CEO sat with her legs crossed, smirking coldly as a man in maintenance coveralls stepped into the cabin. "A janitor on my private jet? I don't remember hiring you," she said icily. The man simply bowed his head. "I'm here to check flight safety." But when the engine suddenly shook violently and the control system failed, the pilot screamed, "Does anyone here know how to handle a hydraulic failure?" The man looked up, his eyes sharp and cold. "Yes, I designed this aircraft." Daniel Holt was 45 years old, a single father with salt and pepper hair, and calm, deep eyes that carried unspoken loss. Aurora Lane was 33, the youngest CEO in Europe's private aviation industry, wealthy beyond imagination, cold as steel, and a perfectionist who believed respect came through power alone. Daniel had once been chief engineer who designed the legendary Falcon A9 private jet series. But after a devastating accident took his wife, a test pilot killed when an experimental engine exploded, he left the corporation without explanation. He applied for an anonymous maintenance technician position at a small charter company, a job that barely covered rent, to raise his 11-year-old daughter Sophie in peace. He avoided the spotlight completely. All he wanted was a quiet life. Aurora was notorious for arrogance and ruthless management. She built her empire crushing competitors and dismissing anyone beneath her. She believed talented people only needed orders, not respect. That day's flight was routine, Paris to New York. On board were Aurora, two nervous assistants, pilot Marcus and Daniel, sent last minute to inspect hydraulic systems because the regular technician was sick. When Daniel stepped into the cabin, wearing worn coveralls stained with grease, Aurora glanced up from her champagne and smiled mockingly. "Is he planning to mop the floor on my plane?" she said loud enough for everyone, voice dripping contempt. Her assistants laughed nervously. Daniel paused briefly, jaw tightening, then replied softly, "I'm here to make sure you arrive safely, Miss Lane." Aurora waved dismissively. "Thanks, but I trust my pilot more than a janitor. Stay out of the way." He smiled faintly, said nothing more, and quietly walked to the back row. He sat near the galley, pulled a notebook from his pocket, and began recording cabin pressure readings. Flight attendant Maria watched closely, the cabin doors sealed with a pressurized hiss. Engines roared to life. Aurora opened her laptop, dismissing the man completely, ready to review reports during the 8-hour flight. But Daniel sat motionless, hand on the armrest, trained eyes tracking subtle vibrations through cabin walls. He tilted his head, listening to engine pitch with the conductor's attention. He felt it in his bones. Something was wrong. The hydraulic system wasn't responding correctly. The vibration frequency was off by a fraction, but to someone who designed every system, that fraction screamed danger. Aurora laughed at her screen, sipping champagne, completely unaware. The plane climbed through darkening sky, breaking through clouds. In the cockpit, Marcus frowned as the first amber warning light blinked. He tapped it twice, hoping for a sensor glitch. The light stayed on. He checked backup display. Same warning. His hand reached for the intercom, then hesitated. Maybe it was nothing. But Daniel was already unbuckling his seatbelt. Maria later testified, "I watched Mr. Holt examine every bolt with his fingers, not just his eyes. He ran his hand along the fuselage seams like checking a patient's heartbeat. When I offered coffee, he declined and said, 'Not until I know she's breathing right.' I asked what he meant. He smiled sadly and said, 'This plane, she's trying to tell us something.' That was 15 minutes before the alarms went off." Aurora Lane carried a secret burden that shaped every cold decision she made. Her father had been a commercial pilot, a man she idolized as a child, who died when his aircraft suffered a catastrophic engine failure over the Pacific. She was 12 years old when officials delivered the news. She never cried at his funeral. Instead, she vowed to control the sky that had taken him, to build an empire so powerful that tragedy could never touch her again. But control was an illusion. and 31,000 feet above the Atlantic, that illusion was about to shatter. When the aircraft reached cruising altitude, Aurora began a video conference with her board of directors in London. Her face filled the laptop screen as she discussed quarterly earnings and expansion plans into Asian markets. Her tone was sharp, dismissive of concerns, cutting off questions she deemed irrelevant. Behind her, through the camera frame, Daniel sat motionless in the back row. One board member noticed him and asked who he was. Aurora glanced back with barely concealed disgust. Just a maintenance worker. Technical people like him are simply cogs in the machine. Without them, I'd still fly just fine. She laughed, and several board members laughed with her, though some looked uncomfortable. Daniel heard every word through the thin cabin air. He didn't react, didn't flinch, just continued watching the hydraulic pressure gauge on the wall panel near his seat. The needle was fluctuating in a pattern he recognized, a pattern that meant the backup system was compensating for a primary failure. His jaw tightened, but he remained silent, knowing that speaking up would only invite more mockery. Suddenly, a sharp electronic beep cut through the cabin. Pilot Marcus's voice came through the intercom, tense but controlled. "Miss Lane, we have a hydraulic sensor alert. The primary system is showing reduced pressure. I'm switching to backup now." Aurora barely looked up from her screen. "How serious is it?" Marcus hesitated. "Hard to say. Could be a faulty sensor, could be an actual leak. The backup system is responding normally, so we should be fine." Aurora waved her hand dismissively. "Then handle it. Don't interrupt me again for minor technical issues. These things happen all the time." She returned to her video call as if nothing had occurred. But Daniel was already on his feet, moving toward the cockpit with purpose. His practiced eye had caught something the pilot hadn't noticed, a slight asymmetry in the wing position, visible through the cabin window, indicating uneven hydraulic pressure distribution. He reached the cockpit door and knocked firmly. Marcus turned, annoyed at the interruption. "Sir, you need to return to your seat. We're handling the situation." Daniel's voice was calm but carried an edge of urgency. "The backup system isn't compensating evenly. You're losing pressure in the port side wing control. If the secondary line fails, you'll lose aileron authority completely." Marcus stared at him. "How could you possibly know that from the cabin?" Daniel met his eyes. "Because I designed the redundancy architecture for this aircraft. The pressure distribution pattern you're seeing means the coupling valve is cracked, not the sensor. Check your differential reading on panel C." Marcus turned to the instrument panel, his face going pale as he found exactly what Daniel described. The differential was climbing. "Who are you?" he whispered. Before Daniel could answer, Aurora's voice cut through from behind. "Get away from my pilot! You're not authorized to be in this area!" Daniel turned to face her, his expression hard. "Miss Lane, your aircraft has a critical hydraulic failure. If we don't address it in the next 10 minutes, the backup system will cascade fail, and we'll have no flight control authority." Aurora's face flushed with anger. "You're trying to create panic. Marcus, remove this man." But Marcus was staring at his instruments, hands beginning to shake. "Miss Lane, he's right. We have a real problem here." The cabin suddenly lurched as the autopilot struggled to compensate for decreasing hydraulic pressure. One of Aurora's assistants screamed. The laptop slid off the table. Aurora grabbed the armrest, her champagne glass shattering on the floor. "What's happening?" Marcus's voice cracked with fear. "Hydraulic pressure dropping on all systems. Does anyone here actually know how to handle a complete hydraulic failure manually?" The cockpit fell silent except for the increasingly frantic alarm tones. Daniel stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chaos with absolute certainty. "Yes, I do. Because I designed every backup protocol in this aircraft. Now let me work, or everyone on this plane dies in approximately 8 minutes." Aurora stared at him, all her arrogance draining away as the reality of their situation crashed down. "Who are you?" she whispered. Daniel pulled off his work gloves, revealing hands marked with old burn scars, and looked directly into her eyes. "My name is Daniel Holt. I'm the chief engineer who designed the Falcon A9, and right now, I'm the only reason you might live to see tomorrow." pilot Marcus later stated in his official report. When Mr. Holt spoke those words, the entire cockpit went silent. I had flown this aircraft for 3 years and never knew its designer was still alive. The way he moved to the controls, the way his hands found every switch without looking, it was like watching the aircraft recognize its creator. He didn't ask permission. He just started saving our lives. The crisis had forced two opposing worlds into violent collision, and now survival depended on whether pride could surrender to truth. Aurora stood frozen in the cockpit doorway, her perfectly manicured hand gripping the frame as the aircraft shuddered again. The woman who had spent years building walls of control around herself suddenly found those walls crumbling at 31,000 feet. Daniel didn't wait for permission. He moved past her into the cockpit, his movements precise and practiced, like a surgeon entering an operating room. Marcus immediately shifted to the co-pilot seat, recognizing authority when he saw it. Aurora followed, her voice shaking. "Why would someone like you work as a maintenance technician? Why hide?" Daniel's hands were already moving across the control panel, flipping switches and reading displays with speed that made Marcus look like a student. Without looking up, Daniel answered, his voice tight with old pain. "After my wife died in an engine explosion during your father's company trials, after I watched her funeral from the back row, while executives who approved faulty specifications sat in the front, I realized something. Prestige doesn't save lives. Attention doesn't prevent tragedy, so I disappeared. I took a job where I could actually touch the aircraft, check every bolt, every seal, every system, and know that the people flying were safe." Aurora's face went white. Her legs nearly gave out. She grabbed the back of Marcus's seat. "My father's company. You're talking about Skyward Technologies, the explosion that bankrupted us, that killed 3 test pilots." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "One of them was your wife?" Daniel finally turned to look at her, and Aurora saw something in his eyes that made her want to disappear, not anger, but a profound sadness that had aged him beyond his years. "Her name was Rachel. She was the best pilot I ever knew. She told me the engine was running too hot 3 days before the test. I reported it. Management overruled me. They had investors coming. They needed the demonstration, so they flew anyway." The cabin lurched violently, throwing Aurora against the wall. Alarms screamed from every panel. Marcus shouted, "Primary hydraulic system completely failed. Secondary is at 15% and dropping." Daniel's jaw clenched. "Reduce throttle on the port engine to 70%. Increase starboard to 92%. We need asymmetric thrust to compensate for the lost aileron control." Marcus stared. "That'll put us into a gradual turn," Daniel snapped back. "Exactly. Manual compensation. It's the only way to maintain attitude without hydraulics. Do it now." Aurora watched as Marcus followed the commands, his hands shaking. The aircraft's violent shuddering smoothed slightly. "It's working," Marcus breathed. But Daniel shook his head. "For now, we're still losing pressure. In about 12 minutes, we'll have 0 flight control authority. We need to descend immediately and find the nearest airport." Aurora pulled herself forward. "There's nothing but ocean below us for another 300 miles. We're over the mid-Atlantic gap." Daniel's expression darkened. "Then we have exactly one option. Emergency descent to 10,000 feet where air density will help us maintain control, then limp toward the Azores. It's risky. The descent without proper hydraulics could tear us apart if we're not precise." The aircraft suddenly dropped. Not a smooth descent, but a stomach-lurching fall. One of Aurora's assistants screamed from the cabin. The laptop that had been on the floor slid backward. Daniel's hands flew across the controls. "Hydraulic coupling just separated completely. Marcus, pull the manual release handle under your left console. Red handle now." Marcus found it and pulled. A grinding mechanical sound echoed through the airframe. "What did that do?" Aurora asked, her voice small. "Mechanical linkage bypass," Daniel explained, sweat beading on his forehead. "Ancient backup system. It connects the control yoke directly to the wing surfaces through steel cables. Like flying a plane from the 1940s. It'll give us maybe 30% control authority." Aurora moved closer, watching his hands work with absolute certainty despite the chaos. You designed this system. It wasn't a question. I designed it for exactly this scenario, Daniel confirmed. I lost my wife because people cut corners on safety. I swore every aircraft I designed afterward would have redundancies upon redundancies. Most engineers thought I was paranoid. Management complained about the extra weight and cost. But I insisted. I told them someday this system would be the difference between life and death. His voice caught. I just never thought I'd be the one using it. The aircraft entered a steep emergency descent. The cabin pressure changed, making everyone's ears pop painfully. Aurora felt tears running down her face, though she didn't remember starting to cry. I'm sorry, she whispered, for what I said, for how I treated you, for everything my father's company did. Daniel didn't respond immediately. He was too focused on managing the descent angle, fighting the control yoke that resisted every input. Finally, he spoke. Your father didn't kill Rachel. The system did. The system that values profit over people. The system that treats engineers and technicians like disposable tools instead of the people who actually understand how to keep others safe. The system you've been perpetuating. Those words hit Aurora harder than any turbulence. She had become exactly what destroyed her own father. How do I fix it? She asked, her voice breaking. If we survive this, how do I fix what I've become? Daniel managed a grim smile as the altimeter spun downward. You start by remembering that every person on your aircraft, from the CEO to the janitor, is someone's daughter, someone's father, someone worth respecting. The aircraft broke through a layer of clouds, revealing dark ocean far below. Too far, too fast. Marcus's voice cracked. We're descending too quickly. Airspeed is climbing past structural limits. Daniel's knuckles were white on the yoke. I know. Aurora, I need you to go to the cabin, find the emergency ballast release panel behind the rear galley, yellow cover, open it and pull every red switch. It'll dump our reserve fuel. We need to shed weight immediately. Aurora didn't hesitate. She ran. In the cabin, the two assistants were strapped in crying. Aurora found the panel, ripped the yellow cover off, and started pulling switches. She felt the aircraft lurch as fuel streamed out into the atmosphere. Through the window, she saw vapor trails. She ran back to the cockpit. Done! Daniel nodded, his face set in concentration. Marcus, full flaps, emergency deployment. The aircraft groaned as the flaps extended, creating massive drag. The descent rate slowed. Airspeed dropping into safe range, Marcus reported, his voice filled with hope. We might actually make this. Daniel stared at the instruments, calculating. Azores Airport is 90 miles. We have maybe 20 minutes of partial control left. It's going to be close. Aurora stood behind them, no longer the arrogant CEO, just a terrified woman watching a man she had mocked fight to save her life. I don't deserve this, she said quietly. Daniel glanced back, and for the first time, his expression softened slightly. Nobody deserves to die at 31,000 feet. Not you, not my wife. That's why I'm still here. First Officer Maria, who had been listening on the intercom, later testified, I heard Mr. Holt tell Miss Lane that nobody deserves to die. His wife had died because of her father's company, and he was still fighting to save her life. I've worked in aviation for 20 years. I've never witnessed anything like that kind of forgiveness in action. After the emergency landing in the Azores, after fire trucks and ambulances cleared, after investigators swarmed the damaged aircraft, Aurora canceled everything. She didn't return to London headquarters. She didn't take board calls. Instead, she rented a car and drove 3 hours to a quiet coastal suburb where Daniel lived with his daughter. The address had been in the crew manifest. Standing at the door of a modest house with peeling paint and a small garden, she had no idea what to say. The door opened before she could knock. A young girl with dark curly hair and Daniel's calm eyes stood there, wearing a school uniform and holding a sandwich. You're the airplane lady, Sophie said, smiling brightly. Dad said you were coming. Aurora felt her prepared speech dissolve. The airplane lady. Is that what he calls me? Sophie laughed. No, I made that up. Come in. Dad's in the workshop. The house was small, but immaculate. Photos covered the walls, mostly Daniel with Sophie at various ages. But Aurora's eyes fixed on one frame, an old photograph of Daniel and a woman in pilot's uniform, both young and smiling, standing beside a jet engine on a test stand. Rachel. Aurora felt her throat tighten. "That's my mom," Sophie said softly. "She died before I could really know her. But Dad talks about her every day. He says she's still flying just somewhere we can't see." Aurora's vision blurred. She must have been extraordinary. Sophie nodded. "Dad says being brave means doing the right thing even when you're scared." The simple wisdom from an 11-year-old hit Aurora hard. She had confused ruthlessness with bravery her entire adult life. Daniel emerged from a doorway, wiping his hands on a rag. He wore jeans and a faded t-shirt. "Aurora, I wasn't sure you'd actually come." She took a shaky breath. "I needed to, not just to thank you. I needed to understand." He gestured to the kitchen table. "Coffee?" They sat while Sophie retreated upstairs. Aurora spoke first. "Skyward Technologies was destroyed after the accident. My father never recovered. He started drinking. He died 5 years later from liver failure. I was 17. I inherited a bankrupt company, millions in debt, and a name associated with negligence." She stared at her hands. "I rebuilt everything. But somewhere along the way, I became the same person who killed your wife. I prioritized profit over people. I became my father's worst mistakes." Daniel poured coffee with steady hands. "I've watched your career. I've read every article about Aurora Lane, the ruthless CEO. Part of me was angry, part impressed, mostly just sad." He met her eyes. "You didn't kill Rachel. A system killed her. A culture that rewards speed over safety. You inherited that system, but you can change it." Something broke open inside Aurora's chest. "I don't know how." Daniel smiled gently. "You start by seeing people. Really seeing them. The technician maintaining your aircraft might have designed the plane you're sitting in. Every person has worth beyond their job title." They talked for hours. Daniel told her about Rachel's passion for aviation, about how he promised to keep the skies safe for other daughters. Aurora told him about watching her father's descent, about building walls to protect herself. As sunset came, Sophie returned. "Are you staying for dinner? Dad makes really good pasta. It's pretty much the only thing he makes." Aurora laughed genuinely. "I would love that." Dinner was simple, but sitting at that small table, listening to Sophie discuss her science project on aerodynamics, watching Daniel's face light up helping his daughter understand Bernoulli's principle, Aurora felt something she hadn't experienced in years: peace, belonging, home. After Sophie went to bed, they sat on the back porch watching stars appear. "I want to make this right," Aurora said quietly. "Not just apologize, but actually change things. A foundation. The Holt Initiative. Supporting engineers and families of pilots lost in aviation testing. Funding independent safety reviews. Creating whistleblower protections. Making sure people like you have a voice that can't be overruled by executives chasing profits." Daniel's eyes glistened. Rachel would have liked that. Aurora reached out, hesitated, then gently took his hand. "I can't bring her back. I can't undo what my father's company did. But maybe I can help make sure it never happens again." They sat in comfortable silence. Two people from opposite worlds finding common ground in shared loss and the possibility of redemption. The mark of a real person, Sophie later wrote in a school essay. "The day Miss Aurora came to dinner, I saw my dad smile the way he does in old pictures with Mom. Not a sad smile, but a real one. Miss Aurora had been mean to him, but he forgave her anyway. Dad says that's what heroes do. They save people even when those people don't deserve it. I think both of them are heroes. From today forward, I choose to look at people a moment longer. I will live with kindness." 1 year later, Aurora stood on stage at the grand launch ceremony of the Holt Initiative. The ballroom was filled with aviation professionals, journalists, and families who had lost loved ones to preventable accidents. Behind her, a screen displayed images of engineers, pilots, and technicians who had died in the name of progress. She wore a simple black dress, no jewelry, no expensive accessories. The woman who once valued appearance above all else now understood that substance mattered more than show. She stepped to the microphone, her voice steady and clear. My hero doesn't wear a vest or demand glory. He simply keeps the sky safe with hands covered in grease and oil. After his wife died in an explosion caused by my father's company, after losing everything, he could have walked away bitter and broken. Instead, he disappeared into quiet work, checking every bolt, every seal, every system, ensuring that other families wouldn't experience his pain. He saved my life when I didn't deserve saving. He forgave me when I didn't deserve forgiveness. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. Aurora's eyes found Daniel sitting in the third row, Sophie beside him holding his hand tightly. The whole initiative exists to honor Rachel Holt and every person who has died because someone prioritized profit over safety. We provide support for families, fund independent safety audits, and protect whistleblowers. But more than that, we're changing the culture that treats technical expertise as disposable and human lives as acceptable losses. She paused, reaching into her pocket. Daniel Holt, would you please come up here? Daniel shook his head slightly, uncomfortable with attention, but Sophie pushed him forward with an encouraging smile. He walked slowly to the stage, his expression guarded. Aurora held out her hand, revealing a small metal badge, the Falcon A9 engineer's insignia, badly burned but carefully restored. This badge was recovered from the test site where Rachel died. It was charred, broken, considered worthless. But nothing is beyond repair if we care enough to fix it. She pressed it into Daniel's palm, her own hands trembling. I can't bring her back. I can't undo what my father's company did to your family. But I can promise you this. Rachel's death will mean something. Her sacrifice will save lives. And the world will know that the quiet heroes, the ones who work in shadows, are the ones who truly keep us safe. Daniel's voice was rough with emotion. Rachel loved flying more than anything except Sophie. She knew every flight carried risk, but she trusted that the people building these machines cared as much as she did. That trust was betrayed. He looked directly at Aurora. You asked me once why someone like me would work as a janitor. The truth is, I never stopped being an engineer. I just chose to work where I could actually touch the aircraft, where I could ensure safety myself instead of trusting executives who saw only numbers. He held up the restored badge. This represents everything Rachel believed in. Excellence without ego, precision without pride, safety above all else. If this initiative can protect even one family from experiencing what Sophie and I went through, then maybe Rachel's death wasn't meaningless after all. The applause was thunderous. People stood, many wiping away tears. Aurora stepped forward and embraced Daniel. Not a formal handshake, but a genuine hug between two people who had found healing and shared pain. When they separated, she spoke again. Daniel, if one day the sky calls to you again, if you ever want to return to design work, to teaching, to anything beyond checking bolts in the shadows, I want you to know something. You won't have to fly alone. We'll be there with you. Daniel smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes for the first time in years. I've already landed, Aurora. After Rachel died, I crashed hard. But maybe landing doesn't mean staying grounded forever. Maybe it just means finding solid ground before you choose to fly again. He looked at Sophie. And this time, when I do fly, I'll make sure my daughter is right there beside me, learning everything Rachel would have taught her. Sophie couldn't contain herself anymore. She ran onto the stage and threw her arms around both of them, hugging Aurora and her father together. Now I have two of the best people in the world, she exclaimed, her voice muffled against their shoulders. The audience laughed through their tears, the sound warm and genuine. Aurora held the girl tightly, this child who had lost her mother to Aurora's father's mistakes, yet who offered forgiveness with the pure heart of youth. As the ceremony ended and people filed out, the three of them stood on the balcony overlooking the tarmac. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. In the distance, a private jet sat on the runway, its white surface reflecting the dying light. Daniel put his arm around Sophie, and Aurora stood beside them, no longer an outsider, but part of something that felt like family. "The sky is beautiful tonight," Sophie whispered. Daniel nodded. "Your mother always said the best time to fly was during sunset. She said that's when you could see both where you'd been and where you were going." Aurora added quietly, "Then maybe that's when we all need to fly. Not running from the past, but carrying it with us as we move towards something better." If you believe stories of healing and redemption like this deserve to be shared, leave a comment and subscribe to this channel. We tell the stories that should never be forgotten.